Hello everyone, and welcome to this video where we will be building a web app that handles authentication using Deno, Fresh and Supabase. Let's first take a quick look at what we'll be building. We'll first be presented with the homepage that is telling us we need to log in to gain access to the rest of the pages. In the navbars, we have links to the home, login, and sign up page. If we go to the sign up page, we can try and sign up with a user. So I'm going to sign up with test1@test.com. Enter a password, hit enter, and we're redirected to the homepage. So now we can use those credentials to log in. test1@test.com. After logging in, we're redirected to the homepage, and now we can notice that the text has changed, telling us that we're logged in, and the button now leads us to a secret page. We can also notice that the navbar changed. We now have a secret and a logout link. If we head over to the secret page, we can see a route that is supposed to be protected and only accessible by logged in users. So if we log out, we head back to the home page. And if we try and access that page without being logged in, we get redirected to the login page, forcing us to authenticate before we can go any further. Great, so we'll be building all this using Fresh and Supabase to handle the authentication part. In terms of requirements, if you don't already have Deno installed, you can head over to deno.com and follow the installation on here. For Supabase, we can head over to supabase.com, and if you don't have an account, you can click on sign in and then create an account. I'm already logged in, so I can go over to our dashboard. And once you're logged in, you can create a new project, select your org, and then just pick the $0 a month, the free pricing plan. Inside of your project, you'll have a section for authentication. If we click on that, the main thing we need to make sure of is in the configuration section under providers. We need to make sure that we have email enabled. We'll mostly just use email for this video. And in the email, you can turn off the confirm email, which should be turned on by default, just for simplicity. Last thing that we're going to need is in the project settings, we also need to have our API keys for the project. So if you hit API, you should see your project URL and the anon public API key. So those are the two that we're going to need to connect to the Supabase client. Now we're all set to create a new Fresh project. We can head over to fresh.deno.dev, go into the docs, click on create a project, and just copy paste this command to create a new project. So we can copy in the command, change that to fresh auth, hit enter. It'll ask us if we want to use Tailwind. I'll say yes. And if we're using VS Code, which I am, this will create a new project, which we can cd into and start it by running Deno task start. And now we should see the basic Fresh project up and running. Now in VS Code for a project, let's first remove everything that was automatically generated by Fresh. So the buttons, counter, API name, we're only going to keep the index route. And inside the index route, let's just remove everything. We'll start by creating the different pages and UI components that are needed. We'll place our layout HTML in its own component so it's easier to reuse. It'll include a navbar component. We also need a route for the login page, signup page, and secret page. Let's start with the navbar component. Inside the components folder, we'll create a new file called nav.tsx. We'll first create an interface for representing the navbar props that will pass it. We'll pass it a Boolean field called logged in to let us know what links to display based on if the user is logged in or not. Then we need to export our nav component, and we'll pass it the nav props and destructure the object to extract the logged in property. We'll create a few constants to represent the different menus. The first one will contain the menus that are common to both logged in and logged out users. It'll contain a list with an object that has a name and a link. For our common links, we only have one, which is the home page. For our logged in menus, we have two of them, the secret and the logout page. For logged out menus, we have the login page and the signup page. With all these set up, we can return our JSX element. For our navbar, we wanted to have a white background with the BG white class. We set the maximum width of the div, and we also want to apply flexbox layout to the div and allow flex items to wrap onto multiple lines. We vertically align the flex items with space between them, and we make sure to center horizontally the div, as well as adding some padding to it. We'll add inside of our div the title for our app, making it large with bold font, followed by an unordered list to display our links with some gap between them. First set of links is going to be the common ones, so we map over the list of common menus, and for each of these menus, we display a list with the href and the name based on the menu object. We want to do the same for the logged in and logged out menus, but depending on the login property. So we add a check to see if the user is logged in or not. If logged in, we do the same thing we did for common menus, but for the logged in menu list. And we do the same thing for if the user is not logged in, we iterate over the non-logged in menus and display the list for them. That's all we need for our navbar component. Next, we'll create our layout component, which will make use of this nav component. So inside the component folder, we'll add a new component called layout.tsx. We'll need a few imports. Head will allow us to set the title of our application. The layout component will help us display child components that we're going to pass to it, so we need to import the component children. And finally, we need our nav component that we just created. Our layout component is going to have some properties. First is the isLoggedIn property, which we will pass down to the nav component. And second is the children component. Then we export our layout component, which will take layout properties. Then we'll return our JSX element. It will contain the head with the title Fresh Auth. Then we pass in our nav component and make sure to pass in the logged in property. And finally, we then display the props children inside of a div that adds some padding and centers the content a bit. Let's make use of this layout inside our empty index route. if we head over to our index route, first we'll import our layout. Then we export our home route. We are going to return the JSX element, which will contain our layout component. We'll pass false for now to isLoggedIn property. Later on, we'll replace that with the actual value of if the user is logged in or not. Inside the layout component, we can pass it a child component, which will include a large and bold text telling us to log in, and a button that redirects us to the login page. For the CSS, I basically went to Tailwind CSS. Under components, I went to button, clicked on show code, and just basically copied the CSS for this one. I updated just a bit to fit my needs, but other than that, you could just reuse the exact same thing or just copy the CSS based off of the GitHub page in the description. If we hit save and head over to the browser, to our local host, and click refresh, we should now see our navbar with the fresh title, home, login, and sign up, and the text telling us to log in to access all pages and our login button. If we change the is logged in to true, hit save again, we should now see that the navbar links changed to display secret and logout. Next, let's create our login page. Under our routes folder, we'll create a new file called login.tsx. First things first, we'll import our handlers to process our login form when we hit submit. We also need the page props to display errors if logged in failed. We'll export our handler constant. We'll only need to handle the post method for this case. And for now, our handler will simply redirect to the home page. We will update this part when we integrate with Supabase to actually do the authentication, and in case of failure, display the errors, or in case of success, redirect to the home page. Then we export our page route, which takes in the props. We'll handle the login errors through URL parameters, and in our case, mainly just one, the error parameter. So we will first get this. It's either going to have a string or null value, which will make use later on in the HTML to either display an error or not. Then we return our JSX element. For the HTML and CSS classes, you can check out the GitHub repository for this project to copy paste those since they're quite large and long to type manually. But first we'll have a section with a gray background. Then we'll put everything inside of a div using flex layout and centering things with padding and margin. We display a login text with large and bold text. Then we create our card UI, which will have a white background, rounded corners, and shadow. Inside of our card, we'll have some padding and vertical spacing. If we have an error, we display an alert type error message with red background. Then we display our form, which will have a post method. Our first input will be the email. You can copy the CSS in the description, or you can also head over to Tailwind Elements under Forms. You can select inputs and copy the code of one that you actually like. the main thing that we need to make sure of is that our input has a type of email and a name email, since we'll use the name to retrieve the value inside of our post handler. Next, we'll have the password input, which is basically copy pasted from the email one, and we simply change the type, name, and ID, and the placeholder value for it. Then we have our login button, which is the same as what we had in our index route. We make sure that the text is logged in and that the type is submit. And last thing is to have some text telling us that if we don't have an account yet, let's redirect the user to the signup page, which we will create in a bit. Now, if we hit save, head over to the browser, to our application, and head over to the login page, we should now see this gray background with a white card and our login form. If we press enter, it should redirect us to our home page. The signup page has exactly the same UI. So let's copy paste. Let's first create the new route. Signup.tsx. And then let's copy everything we have in login into our signup page. We'll first change the name of our exported component to signup. Make sure that the text for it is different. Create account, for example. We also need to update the button text to sign up. As well as our redirect text to already have an account. And change the link to login, as well as the text to login. Now, if we hit save, head over to our page, click on login, nothing should have changed. If we click on sign up, we should see create an account, and we have the sign up, already have an account, go to login, and they should behave exactly the same. Last page we need to create is the secret page. We'll create a new folder to hold all our authenticated routes. We'll call it auth. And inside of that, we'll create a new file called secret.tsx. Our secret page is really simple. We'll import our layout component. We export our route and return a JSX element, which will make use of the layout component, passing it true to the isLoggedIn parameter, since only authenticated users will eventually have access to this page. And we'll have a child component inside of it, which will contain text saying that this route is protected. And an image, which we got from Undraw. I just went to undraw.co, picked a random image that I liked, downloaded the SVG for it, and inside of our static folder, we can go ahead and copy it. Make sure that the image source is the same as the name of your SVG file. And this completes our secret page. If we hit save, go over to our browser, hit refresh, we can now go to our secret page. This completes the first part where we've set up our UI, routes, and components. In the second part, we'll integrate it with Supabase to be able to sign up users, log in, and see how to protect routes to only display them to authenticated users by making use of middlewares. Thanks for watching.